Financial Survival Network, helping you survive and thrive in the new economy. Go to CarrieLutz.com and sign up for 30 free micro trainings on financial survival.
$14.90 WGCH. This is Kerry Lutz. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. If you're wondering whether Atlas is really shrugging or not, my next guest, Yaron Brook, is the head of the Ayn Rand Institute, and he's probably got more insight into that question than anyone else out there. Yaron, welcome back. How are you?
Thanks for having me on again. I'm doing well.
It's really good to have you back. I've gotten to hear a lot more of your views, and on the issues, it's quite compelling. So we were at Freedom Fest together. A few hundred freedom lovers were there. What was your take on the whole thing?
Well, I thought it was interesting. I mean, it seemed this particular Freedom Fest was in the Bahamas, and it was geared, I think, more towards investors and towards kind of predicting, where one should be putting one's resources given the economic uncertainties. And people like Peter Schiff were there, and Stephen Moore from the Wall Street Journal, who do a lot of political and kind of investment advice. But I thought it was a good crowd, and I participated in a few panels, and it was all interesting and fun.
Don't you find it amazing, though, that program, Freedom Fest, started, I guess, about 10 years ago with no participation at all? And fast forward, now granted the Bahamas one is smaller, but in Vegas last summer, there were 2,500 people there, which set all sorts of records, which should make people start standing up and taking notice.
I would hope so. I mean, I think that, yes, there are a lot of people, I think, again, like the sales of Atlas Shrugged, I think that Obama has been good to those of us who believe in free markets, because he's made the choice very kind of clear and concrete, and he's made it very real. And I think people are realizing that there's an alternative to the statism that both the Democrats and the Republicans represent. And as a consequence, they're buying books like Atlas Shrugged, and they're coming to events like Freedom Fest.
Yeah, so, I mean, I personally believe this is a highly negative time politically. The debate is degenerated.
No question.
We don't talk about issues, and yet maybe the contrast of having the ultra-statist, ultra-leftist, if we can call him that, maybe that is a good thing for the debate, because it frames it so well and really shows us what the choice is, right?
I think that's right. I think, though, it's only a good thing if people pay attention, and if we can articulate our message coherently and really make a case for what the alternative is. And this, of course, the Republicans have failed dramatically to do. We've got a Republican candidates who are unable to make any kind of case for anything. And even the so-called libertarian candidate, I think Ron Paul, what a missed opportunity. I think he would have had a fantastic opportunity if only he was more articulate and more passionate and could actually communicate the message of freedom and the message of capitalism. Because what a stage and what a contrast we can draw, not only with Obama, but with some of these other Republican candidates who are, like Rick Santorum, are almost equally statist as Obama is. And, this is an opportunity for anybody who's a freedom lover, anybody who is a free market believer, to really stand up and make the case for free markets. Unfortunately, we are not going to have a politician, I think, on the Republican side who is going to reflect our concerns and our views. And it's a tragedy, because this was the year Republicans should have shone, right? They should have really had their A team out there, and they should have pounded Obama into dust. And instead, we've got the C or D team, third string candidates who can barely articulate a pro-freedom message.
Yeah, it really is sad, because when you look closely at everything the Obama administration has done, and the statists for the past, I guess we're close to 80 years now, right? FDR in 1934,
sure.
We're talking 80 years of unabated failure. But because the economy was mostly healthy after the Depression and after World War II, it was easy to sweep it all under the rug. Now we're in a position where the failures are manifest, they're obvious to everyone who has any interest, whether it's the post office, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Fannie, Freddie. You go down the list of government programs, every single one is an unabashed, unmitigated disaster and failure. And yet, how can we not get that message out? Why isn't that first and foremost in this debate, the failure of government? Because if it's a referendum on the failure of government, then the individual rights people, the objectivists, win every time, right?
Absolutely. Well, I don't know if we win, because I think the public is corrupted. It's corrupted in the way it thinks. It's corrupted in the way it's been educated. It's corrupted in its knowledge of history. So we need not only an articulate message about the economics and about the politics of what's going on, but we need to convince the public that it holds on to some deeply held false beliefs. And this was really my kind of talk that I gave at Freedom Fest. I gave a talk about, why bad economics doesn't seem to ever go away. And my argument is that it's not about economics. It's about, people believe in economics that fit their worldview, their if you will, their ethical view about the world. And unless we're willing to challenge on a very fundamental basis the ethics of the culture, the ethics to believe that, your life is not yours and you're just part of the group, and, the collectivism and the altruism that is so prevalent in the culture we live in, unless we're willing to challenge that and articulate an alternative, and then be patient while, we re-educate a young generation of Americans. There are no shortcuts here, and there's no easy way to do this. This is a long-term educational project. People don't care. People look at the economics, and it should be clear by now that statism had failed. But yet the Republicans can't make that argument because they're statists themselves. And, when libertarians make the argument, they make it in terms of economics alone. And people just don't buy it. They don't believe them because the economics, the politics of statism, the ethics of statism are consistent with people's view of the world. They want government to be a benevolent caretaker of their lives. They believe that's right. They believe the rich should pay more taxes so that their wealth is redistributed to the poor, because it's their moral obligation to do so. And unless we challenge the morality of it, unless we challenge the fairness of it, let's use Obama's terms. Let's take over fairness. Why are we giving Obama the moral high ground when he talks about fairness? Let's talk about the fact that redistribution of wealth is not fair. Indeed, it's unjust and corrupt and evil. Let's talk about what fairness really demands, and that is that everybody stand up on their own 2 feet and not demand at the point of a gun that somebody else feeds them. Let's talk about what fairness really means. But for that, we have to be able to articulate a morality of self-interest. And nobody other than Ayn Rand has been willing to do that.
I know what you mean, and I just want to relay a little personal story to you, because what you're talking about is getting people to acknowledge that they have false beliefs and that they have mistaken ideas. And when my brother was in kindergarten, it was Christmas time, and he was upset about something, and he told all the kids in his kindergarten class that there was no Santa Claus. And this was not what the teacher wanted by any stretch, but yet it was the truth. And the kids became hysterical, and this teacher called up my mother in a huff, and I don't want to get into all the family and religious aspects of this thing, but the point is that sometimes the truth hurts. It requires you to acknowledge, A, that you're mistaken, and B, that you're susceptible to be mistaken again and again and again, and then requires you to change. And isn't that like the hardest thing to get people to do, to admit mistakes and change for the better?
I think that's right, but it's also hard for people to recognize that they're mistaken. That is, you have to be able to with Santa Claus, it's relatively easy, but it's still hard, right? But when it comes to something as deeply held in the culture and it's prevalent and ingrained in the culture for over 2,000 years, this notion that your life doesn't belong to you, that, your moral obligation, your moral duty is to your brother. You are your brother's keeper. You need you love your neighbor like yourself. All the altruist premises that exist out there are so culturally ingrained and have been taught to everybody for over 2,000 years that it is a challenge to overcome those. Now, I think it's possible in America because America was founded on this notion of individual rights. It was founded on the notion that your life belongs to you, and we have in our Declaration of Independence this notion that we have an inalienable right to pursue our own happiness. What could be more self-interested than that? So I think it's possible in America, but it is challenging, and to do that, we have to have the courage to go out there into the public and say, you hold false ideas. You hold not just false ideas about economics, but much more importantly, you hold false ideas about ethics, about morality, about your place in the world. And these false beliefs, your parents taught you and your grandparents held. And these are bad ideas. They've led us on this path towards statism, and they're going to lead us towards a path towards authoritarianism unless you're willing to challenge them. And by the way, we have better ideas, and these better ideas will liberate you and help you to live a fulfilled, happy, successful life. But you have to have the courage to go out and do that, and you have to believe in it yourself first. So what we need is more spokesmen, not just for the economic case for capitalism, but for the moral, intellectual case for capitalism. We need to make the case for individualism. Fundamentally, the battle for America is a battle between individualism and collectivism. And we need people who can articulate the case for individualism. And we have very few of those. And I think even at places like Freedom Fest, unfortunately, we have people who can make the case on the economics, but are very reluctant or it's very hard for them to make the case, this more ethical case for individualism. But we need spokesmen. We need thousands of spokesmen because, collectivists are winning. They have been winning for the last 80 years, 100 years. And unless we can reverse the trend, collectivism always leads to authoritarianism, always leads to decline and decay.
Yeah, and poverty, individual and collective poverty.
Absolutely.
And one thing that people will always come back, and this is a ploy of the left, is, but what about the poor people? What about the person who's disabled? If the state doesn't help him, who will? And obviously that neglects a long-standing American tradition of philanthropy that the world has never known. But what do you say to those people?
Sure, but there's even something even deeper than that. That is that how did poverty become even an issue, right? I mean, it used to be before capitalism that everybody was poor. We were all poor. Kids died before they reached the age of 1. Very few children lived to see adulthood. Life as a subsistence farmer was horrific and very, very poor. We were much poorer before capitalism than anybody is in the United States today. Anybody, the poorest of the poor are not as poor as we were. So capitalism is the liberator of poverty. It liberates us from poverty. So the biggest victims of statism, the biggest victims of collectivism and socialism are the poor. Are the ambitious poor, the poor that are willing to work and make something of their lives? So the real key is that freedom helps anybody who's willing to work and to live and to take responsibility over their own lives. And if we could liberate the economy of this country, then there would be almost no poor. That is, all the people who today view themselves in poverty, they could get real jobs and they could work for a living and they could advance and their standard of living would go up and the economy would boom and thrive under a philosophy of individualism. We do away with stupid laws like the minimum wage that creates poverty among minority teens. They're the biggest victims of the minimum wage law. We do away with kind of all the restrictions and all the labor laws that reduce employment in this country. I mean, when capitalism is left free, when capitalists are left free, when the economy can really move, when regulations are eliminated and taxes are dramatically reduced, then capitalism creates many more jobs than we have people available. And productive employees, their standard of living and their wages rise. And then that tiny fraction of a percent, that almost insignificant fraction of people who really can't help themselves, and I'm talking about people who cannot work, because even people in wheelchairs can work and can make a living, but people who really cannot work, then there's plenty of charity. There's tons of charity to help them. And, during the 19th century in America, there were all kinds of mechanisms by which private enterprise helped the truly destitute. There were mutual aid societies. There were charitable institutions. There was almost no safety net provided by government, and yet, during the 19th century, millions of people, the poor, the uneducated, the truly oppressed from all over the world, particularly from Europe, came to this country, and they had nothing. And yet they found jobs, and they raised kids, and they sent those kids to college, and within 2 generations, in some cases 1 generation, those kids were middle class and better than that. So the opportunities that capitalism creates are just unbelievable, and it's hard for people to really see it. But what you need for that is a completely different mentality, the anti-entitlement mentality, an individualist mentality.
Yeah, well, I think we're getting to that point because the state is no longer going to be able to provide those functions. The Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the whole welfare state around the world is collapsing around us. And as much as they want to blame it on capitalism, that argument's not going to carry the day, I don't believe, once the ultimate collapse occurs. Anyway, we've got to wrap up. So where do we find you, Yaron? And where are you going to be next?
Number of places. You can find me on Facebook. Just put in my name, Yaron Brook, Brook. Follow me on Twitter. It's ybrook. And we have a new blog now. It's called capitalism.aynrand.org. And Ayn Rand is AYNRAND.org. So capitalism.aynrand.org. It's a new blog with me and my co-author, Don Watkins. And, of course, the Ayn Rand Institute website, aynrand.org.
Right. And any appearances coming up? Any television interviews?
Television's usually last minute kind of thing, but I've got an exciting talk next week that I'm giving at the Postgraduate Naval Academy. I'm giving the Secretary of the Navy speech on the morality of capitalism, and there'll be about 1,200 postgraduate Navy students, I guess cadets. So it's very, very exciting.
That really is exciting. We'll have you on in a couple of weeks again, and tell us how that went. And
Sounds
the blog's really exciting. We'll talk to you soon.
Look forward to it.